A good horror game is something special. It is able not just to challenge us with its gameplay or tell a good story, but to scare us, to haunt our dreams and idle thoughts, even to make us question our own perceptions of reality. In this podcast, we meet the developers of both existing popular horror titles and hotly anticipated upcoming ones to discuss how they do it, what inspires them, and all things spooky and unnerving. Welcome to Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards. Hello, and welcome to Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards. We're your hosts, Phil and Will, and today we are joined by Mike, who's the creative director at Brass Token Games behind the Chant and the DLC The Gloom Below, which, depending on when this video releases, has either just released or is just about to release. So first of all, thank you very much for talking to us. It's a pleasure.
Thanks as well. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So obviously we want to talk about the Chant and the new DLC for the game because there's a lot to talk about there in terms of all that. But first of all, kind of because the whole point of all this is kind of to celebrate horror as a genre and particularly horror games, I think what we've been starting off by asking people is what kind of drew you into like the horror genre, what kind of attracted to you and from a personal point of view.
I've always been a fan of the horror genre, both in film and well, I wouldn't say literature, more into like pulp horror when I was younger. So I was big into weird fiction and Lovecraft, and even into a lot of the more like fantasy side of things with like Robert E. Howard and that. So that was kind of what I really got into, I guess, creatively. On that side. And I've been working in video games for many years, primarily in I guess, kind of action, open world side of things. And when starting on the Chant, it was kind of just a personal a desire to make something kind of similar to the classic survival horror days of like the early Resident Evils, Alone in the Dark, and so forth. So it kind of started off with that, and and then our team grew, and we ended up with with the Chant on that end.
So something like Resident Evil, but with a more Lovecraftian cosmic horror kind of twist to it.
Yeah. Actually, the game started off as a fixed camera angle game, and it was very mixed media and so forth, very small. There was only a few of us working on it, and I think just as we did more and more research and looked at the subject matter of a spiritual retreat, I think that just that kind of concept of like how would you take something like From Beyond, where you can see into another dimension, and how would you apply that to a more like the setting of a spiritual awakening? We thought that was a pretty novel approach to kind of a classic idea.
Yeah. Just before we get on to like talking about the spiritual retreats, you mentioned there like it started off as a fixed camera. What was that a conscious decision to move away from that once the game took life, or was that just kind of how it like the needs of the gameplay or that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was a very, very interesting concept originally. I was taking a lot of photographs and doing a lot of research at the time, and it was kind of mixing 3D and photography and whatnot. And so it was kind of started off as a bit of a love letter to that classic approach. I think we changed because it was actually extremely difficult to do the fixed camera approach. And it was very, very time consuming, and the iteration was much more difficult. And then as we saw, when like Resident Evil remake came out and actually changed the camera perspective, and that was looking quite appealing, we made the switch, and then it gave us a lot more flexibility, and I think it worked really well. We were working in Unreal Engine, so it felt quite natural. So yeah, it was. I mean, there are things that we miss about that fixed camera approach. I think there's a lot of there's a very unique feeling and atmosphere you get from it. But yeah, like I said, it was a lot of work and frustration.
Yeah.
I can imagine it's obviously no. So obviously being the creative director at Brass Token and creating the story of the Chant, what do you believe makes a good horror?
I mean, I think there's so many different types of horror and horror storytelling. I mean, for me, what I've always loved about horror is the sense of kind of weirdness and it's the ability to tell something a little off kilter, like a story that's a bit different, because often in the settings, you're exploring a situation just by nature with a lot of horror. It typically can't be exposed to the general population, so you're often in a remote setting with a remote situation, and there's a lot of imagination you can play with, and and I personally really like that side of things. I think there's been so many amazing ideas over the years that have sprouted, from horror, and you can see that influencing things like, the Twilight Zone or Mirror and stuff like that. So a lot of those kind of novel, thoughtful ideas, and then I think aesthetically, I just love. I love how stylized you can be with horror, and also how you can hide so many things in the shadows and so forth. So I think it's a genre that just is so wide open. There's just so many types, from your slasher movies to your kind of more esoteric folk horror. And culturally, there's so many different things to explore, and I think there's always also when you're looking in a culture that you're not necessarily that familiar with personally, there's also often an element of strangeness as well, which is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of curious to ask whether if anyone on the team had a bad experience at a spiritual retreat at any point. Whether,
no, we have a lot of them in Vancouver, BC. It's in the lifestyle here. There's a lot of retreats like that, so that it kind of more of an observational thing, and how could we come up with a modern day setting that would allow for this kind of situation.
Oh, no, definitely. Now, you hear of a lot of real life horror stories from people that do this kind of thing. So being able to live through that experience has been quite.
Absolutely,
for sure.
And then there's actual, Vancouver has some, a history of a bit of cult activity, and then you even have, elements here, even in more recent times, friends of friends who've been involved in. Different organizations and stuff. So there's just so much to research right now. And then also just for us, the landscape. One thing that's been really nice is a lot of the Chant was influenced by the Pacific Northwest and locations around here. So we have a lot of interesting spots to research in our backyard, which is pretty cool too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for the benefits of our audience who might not already know, do you want to kind of give a bit of background about what happened, the story of the Chant?
So in the main, sorry, we're just coming off the DLC right now, wrapping things up there. But yeah, the story takes place in a remote kind of island retreat. And the story is based around the main character, Jess, who is going to the retreat to see an old friend. She has some, she's not really into, the spiritual side of things. I think she's somewhat pessimistic, but she has some kind of buried trauma from her past. So she's kind of at a turning point in her life, and she goes and meets her friend Kim, and they kind of do a ritual to, awaken themselves and kind of purge their negative energies. And the leader of the group's, he's in over his head as well, and things don't go right. And
well, they definitely don't. Anyway.
Yeah, and then it kind of quickly all kind of descends, and Jess basically has to kind of embrace a lot of the things that she didn't believe in to kind of, overcome her own fears and deal with the, I guess, personal demons of the other people at the retreat, and save her friend Kim.
Yeah, I think that was probably one of the things that was most interesting about it. Playing it was, I mean, obviously you got all the survival horror elements and kind of exploring this whole place, but having, rather than like your usual thing, whether it's zombies or weird monsters in the mind or whatever, you always shoot them generally, but instead you're using sage and cleansing crystals and all this sort of stuff, and it's just I like that was a really unique way of kind of dealing with all the combat, I thought. So how accurate, if I come across a monster that's a big carnivorous flower that's speaking with the voice of my best friend, and do I need to start burning incense? With how accurate is this stuff?
Well, that's quite readily available these days. I mean, you could give it a shot, but I think for us it was just that concept of a lot negative energy and so forth, and well, what if that was actually true? So I think, and then I think with a lot of these things, doing research into alchemy and so forth, there is some kind of both scientific and pseudoscientific I think justifications around a lot of these, and that we found interesting, where it's well, actually the chemical components of that could actually have an impact and so forth. And a lot of our creatures are kind of insect-like, or we were influenced by insects and undersea creatures and stuff like that. So we tried to apply our own game developer science wherever possible. So
yeah.
So
obviously here at the Horror Game Awards, we keep up with obviously all the new games that are coming out, and we're obviously very close now to your 1 year anniversary of the release of the Chant. So how does it feel for you and yourself and the studio?
Oh no, it feels great. I think the team really came together for that. It was a pretty ambitious, game for our first title. So I think it's been pretty it's been pretty amazing that to come up with that, and then also working on the DLC, which was just announced. That's been also quite exciting too, because it's quite different. I think that's something where you're working on something for a very long time, and things, especially when you're filing, things can become a little routine, because you're working on things you'd love to just be tuning the gameplay and making it as fun as possible right up to release, but often you're dealing with different console dependencies, performance, compatibility, and so forth. So it was really nice to switch gears and work on something that's structurally different as well. There's definitely a lot of the Chant's DNA in the DLC, but our gameplay model, we've taken. We wanted to go a little more on the survival horror focus, and we've got some roguelite elements in there where you can lose certain elements, and we've added more upgrades and stuff like that. So it's been fun for the team to really be able to kind of shift gears on that end, and also take some of those elements to improve the main game, which I think there were certain things that we really wanted to do in the main game. Just like I said, quality of life improvements. We've improved the combat. We've improved things like the targeting system in the last year. Made the AI a lot more aggressive, and just taking a lot of the feedback that we got after releasing the game, and fixing things up or addressing feedback wherever we could, while also working in parallel on the DLC.
Definitely, yeah. Because I bet it's been quite fun working on the DLC. Because obviously, with the DLC, you can be a lot more dynamic, can't you, and change your ideas a lot more frequently. Like obviously, when you plan for the main game, as you mentioned, like it's very rigid. But it's as any other ideas come out for maybe potentially other future DLC down the line.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'd love to. We'll see on that end. I mean, it's the one thing that's neat about the DLC is we explore. I mean, the DLC doesn't have you know, as much in the way of like cinematics. There's a lot of lore, but the situation, I'm not actually 100% sure what's been revealed just yet. But the DLC, you know, it takes place after the events of the main game, and you actually get to learn more about what happened in the 70s, because that's something we actually spent a lot of time, you know, creating the lore and the fiction of what happened with Monroe Anton, who was like the cult leader in the 70s, and you know, even with his family, there's a history of the island. So there's a lot of stuff we'd like to explore in the past, and you also get to, in the main game, you play as Babs, and just in the prologue, and you get to understand the kind of relationship a bit more, her and her father, and the father of their child Tyler is the cult leader in the modern day, where the Chant takes place. So it was really nice to explore those elements, and you know, there were certain things that we didn't get to reveal in the main game that we could apply here, but also have a little more freedom, because the DLC takes place in like pretty much entirely in the gloom, and it's kind of this strange merging of the physical world and the gloom. So it's a little trippier, you know, than the original game. We really got to like go to town on the more like strange kind of cosmic horror elements this time around.
So is it because the DLC generally tends to be a little bit tougher in terms of difficulty than the main? Like, is this going to be a harder experience playing through this one than the main game?
I think so. It's always hard when you're working on games to know how difficult they actually are when you're playing them day in, day out. And it's often a kind of thing of where, you know, in the dev team, it's like, oh, it's too easy. And then someone will come in and play it, and it's like, oh, you died dozens of times. So it's definitely, I'd say, tougher than the main game. And I highly advise playing the main game first, not just for gameplay reasons, but also just narrative reasons as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so what can we expect in terms of, is there new mechanics? So I mean, obviously I know at the time we're talking about this, it'll have literally just come out, so you don't want to spoil too much, but like kind of we get some hints in terms of what to expect.
Yeah, so I mean, just from a kind of laundry list of like, you know, features and that, we've added a couple new weapons to the game. So there's a new melee weapon with the iridescent blade, which allows you to kind of, you craft these weapons, and then you can like charge that up and, you know, unleash extra damage. We also have like this plasma sack that you craft together from the like some plants and that in the world that will actually like do AoE damage to different enemies. So, and you can also place it as a trap. So it's like a strategic weapon. One really neat thing that we've added, this was something we actually wanted to add originally to the main game, but we just didn't have the time, is you can upgrade your abilities now. So the prismic abilities you get, there are different upgrades that you can get for them. So that adds a lot of strategy and a bit of a cool power curve, you know, on that end. So it is really neat now when you can like, you know, combine abilities together and so forth. So I'd say from like a gameplay standpoint, those are, you know, those you know, the ability upgrades and the new weapons, and then we have some new, I don't want to spoil too much, but we have some new creatures and challenges and so forth that where you can, it's highly advised to, you know, take advantage of the new techniques you have at your disposal. So. And then we also have things like we have like a random encounter system. So like the creatures won't know, because in the main game the creatures were all, it was pretty. I mean, it was a bit of a hub and spoke model there, and you could explore things in different order. But the story and such was quite linear. This time around, it's a little more open ended, and you have a little more agency in the order that you do things.
Cool. So, I mean, from your point of view, in terms of making this compared to the base game, what would you say biggest challenge that you faced?
Biggest challenge, I'd say. Well, probably, trying to, come up with new ideas that also fit within the structure of the base game, because I think, the DLC, it, like I said, the DNA and the code and the tech they're all based on the core game. So there are certain things that, may be really exciting for the DLC, but then we don't want to maintain to complete. I'm getting probably a little more game dev side of things, but discrete systems and whatnot. So there were times where we had okay, well, there's this version of the Mandaleech in the main game, and now we have this modified version in the DLC, and then it's we're developing one, and we're well, it would be good if we brought that behavior into the main game as well, right? Because just to make it consistent. So I think balancing those things from a development standpoint was quite challenging, but we got the hang of it pretty early on, and then started trying to make things as synonymous as possible between the two, because trying to manage, having duplicate assets and so forth was proving to be quite challenging. So
yeah, so make it something that's more like an evolution than a completely separate.
Exactly. And also I guess, when you do bring those improvements to the main game, without having that many resources to test it, and having that perspective, on it, because we're so focused on the DLC, we didn't want to break anything in the main game. So I think it was just, trying to be as, I guess, kind of daring and pushing as hard as we could without, negatively affecting the core experience.
Yeah. So in terms of and obviously Will mentioned earlier that it's been nearly a year at this point since the game came out. You've had quite a, I think, positive community response in terms of the fan base that's grown from this. And so what's that side of things been like? The experience of kind of this growing and becoming something which is built a community?
I think it's amazing. I mean, when you get to hear directly from the players, it's that's in many ways why we do what we do. It's it's very encouraging, and I know even Sutton has been working closely with the announcement of the DLC and that, and the support we're receiving and so forth has been fantastic. So, and it's also just really cool too to be able to discuss things like people like yourselves, where there's a common love for the genre and so forth. So there's something very personal, I think, about that, especially when it's also neat too when you're when you're a smaller studio like us. It's been really exciting, even with the community before release, to get feedback and see how certain things resonate or certain things don't, and have the ability to kind of adjust things where possible, and or reveal things, or kind of embrace things that may not be so obvious. So, and like I said earlier too, what we did with the not just the DLC, but improvements to the core game, so much of that came from the community. So just taking that feedback and seeing what we could do to address people's concerns.
Yeah, because I know, certainly from the player side with smaller studios, and when it often feels a lot more personal, because it feels like you can be listened to about the game and what the issues are with it, or anything that's really good about it, and also feel these people understand where we're coming from. They like the same sort of stuff. They're making this because they like us. They like these classics, survival horror. They like all this sorts of stuff. And then, but yeah, I suppose I never thought of it being obviously the opposite side of it, being you've basically got this instant feedback network as well.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah, it's really incredible, and I mean also too, like I think when you know, people are fans of the genre or particulars of the game or whatnot, you can, I think oftentimes there's, you know, there's an added interest, so then you can get some really good pointed feedback, you know, on that end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. So it's great to see that. Obviously, you bringing out the DLC. And one thing that we wanted to mention is this the end of the Chant? Are we going to potentially see any more, like a sequel or anything in the future potentially?
I will have to see on that end. Yeah, I can't say anything on
No.
that. I mean, we'd love to. We'd love to, you know, explore this universe. Yeah, further on. So,
No.
and like, because like I said, we do have other things that we've planned and worked on that we'd really like to revisit.
Yeah. No, it's always worth a cheeky question. You never know.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you don't know necessarily what your next project might be or where the Chant might go, is horror going to be the thing that you do as a studio? Is that going to stay your like main area? Do you think?
I wouldn't say. I think there would always be horror elements, but I don't think we really want to be pigeonholed, you know, in that vein. I mean, like for me personally, I've worked on a lot of different genres, but I'd say the kind of tone and sensibility that we're going with, or that we did with the Chant, it's definitely something that will carry forward. I think, you know, these types of games are what we're focused on and what we have a lot of experience in. And I think, but I think, yeah, we'd love to, you know, visit things. Also, I'd say like I think there's things like traditional horror, and then there, you know, if you even look at what falls under horror nowadays is so varied. And I think, you know, you're starting to see nowadays a lot of, you know, horror elements, you know, in other settings. So I think even with something like the Chant, where it's not necessarily a traditional horror setting with a horrific, you know, kind of thing that occurs, that is something that I could see us, you know, doing again, but in something a little bit different than even I'd say the Chant, because I think even the Chant, you know, the location and so forth is quite, you know, it's got a lot of horror staples, you know, in it, like outside of the setting of the characters, but yeah, there is something we want to do that that is a bit not your traditional horror setting, but
yeah,
you know, has those elements, and when things go wrong, you're dealing with a very a situation. Because another thing I love just about horror is you're often someone's in a very unique situation. This is like a situation where no one has prepared them for this particular thing that is occurring, and you know, that adds to kind of the loneliness and desperation and often absurdity, you know, situation. So,
yeah. Because you mentioned there that you've worked on a lot of different genres. Is there any creatively, is horror like one of your top genres, or do you have like a favorite genre that you've worked on?
Well, I mean, I like elements that have a bit of the fantastic, and also have maybe a bit of like humor, you know, in them. Looking at things, turning things on their head a bit. But no, I pretty flexible. Pretty. I mean, as a love a lot of genres, so you know, it's. But yeah, no, I pretty flexible. Oftentimes, when you're working on one particular thing, you know, even if it's just a particular, not even necessarily the genre, a particular look, it's like, okay, now we've been doing that for a handful of years now. You know, it's like,
let's try
we've
something.
done all this in the daytime. Now let's do it at night. Now, this is, you know, everything's all grimy and dirty and, you know, kind of grim. Let's do something that's a little more upbeat. So.
Yeah. Well, I suppose even in horror, you can always find like the funny side and the absurd side of a lot of things as well, or have something that's absolutely terrifying in a bright, shiny environment. So there's plenty of opportunities to mix it up.
Yeah, because I mean, even it's amazing when you see some of the other developers too, like in the horror genre, where they take you take a particular approach. And I remember like when a game like Soma comes out, you're like, wow, this is totally different, but it's incredible at the same time. And I think, like I said earlier, it's just, I think in the last probably 5 years, people have been doing so many different things with horror. And, I love that people are bringing satire back to horror in very clever and intelligent ways. And, basically exposing horror to people who, aren't necessarily, originally looking for a horror film, right? Which I think is, or even you look at, while working on this, you look at a movie like Annihilation, which has like amazing cosmic horror elements to it, but it's not, I wouldn't call it a traditional, horror movie, but it's definitely inspired, by a lot of, kind of classic or interesting horror concepts. So
yeah,
I think that to me is what I'm really finding super exciting. And this, I mean, I still like slashers and all that kind of stuff, but I think it's just I think the genre has become pretty mature, and you're also seeing a lot of the old, like a big influence for us was like the old like 70s, Italian horror and stuff like that aesthetically, and you see that influence just happening, like big time in the last few years as well, right? Yeah. Like not just within horror, but just you see there's so much, so many people are drawing from the past, and especially a lot of some old obscure movies and so forth.
Yeah. No, so you've probably been very busy with developing the Chant and obviously now the DLC as well. Have you had any chance to play any other horror games this year?
Lately, no. Like lately, I have not been playing too many. But I guess Village obviously is amazing, and but there's quite a few coming up that I'm going to be playing. That's for certain. How about yourselves? Any recently? Or?
Yeah, well, we try and keep on top of them. Obviously, October is going to be a very busy month, I will say.
Yeah. I just thank God that Alone in the Dark moved.
Yeah, I saw that too. I just saw that recently. I was definitely looking forward to that one.
Yeah, because you can definitely see people having to make the choice there whether they pick up one or the other. But now at least we've got a bit more time.
Yeah. Anyone's most recently you've all been playing?
I'm trying to think what recent game I played.
I think they all blend together once you look at them all. It's just trying to think what I've managed to play, because I work a job that keeps me very busy, so it's trying to find spare time other than this. It's quite difficult.
I think from ones that have just come out this year, like you've played like obviously Resident Evil 4, and then also games like Bramble the Mountain King, which is like a platformer. That's
that was a really big surprise this year.
Really good, worth checking out. I mean, one of the reasons we asked is because obviously we're going to see if, like, for this year's horror game awards coming up in December, like if you had your eye on anything for horror game of the year, or if you'd not had a chance to.
Well, no, I mean, that's kind of the thing. Like, we're just wrapping this up, so that's kind of where it's like, okay, now it's time to play some games. So definitely in especially in the October month, we'll be catching up on a lot of stuff for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine.
We've been making a list of like how many released this year, and there's a lot, isn't there?
I literally cannot keep up. As soon as I put them into the spreadsheet, it expands again. And you're just like, how could it? Like, this would literally be a full-time job just updating the spreadsheet.
Yeah, and well, the hard thing is too is I mean, so often too horror games, they're linear story based, often with a beginning and an end. So it's not like, I can just dabble around in a multiplayer experience for an hour or two so much. Like, you really want to put the time in, and you really need to be in the right frame of mind and the right focus. So I think that's always that's even the thing too. It's like where it's like, just want to dedicate an entire weekend to this. So yeah,
No.
so definitely October is going to be a good month for that.
Yeah.
And then and then with you, when does that time frame end? Like when is your? Because I guess it's in December.
Yeah, I think because we've not actually. I don't know at the time. Will we have announced the date of the awards? I think at this time.
Yeah, by the time this comes out, we'll have announced this. So in 2 days from the date of recording, we officially announce it. Actually,
Okay, cool.
So, but it's basically the end of November is kind of the cut-off date in terms of to get things in. So, hoping not too much gets released in December.
No, that's the thing. We held off for so long, didn't we? Because of I think Callisto Protocol released in the middle of December. So like, people are really hyped for this. We kind of should include it. And then
I guess that's always the time frames are always a bit strange. Well, especially if you're in that month and you're preparing everything, and then you get thrown a curveball. And also it seems like there's so many games coming out that often you see dates shifting and so forth just because of that, right? Like not necessarily because of development delays. It's just it seems like it's a hard time for people to even just plan out like, okay, we're coming out this one. Oh no, that just got announced. It's like it's basically like they're all like puzzle pieces. Right?
No, I think that's the thing. Like, because obviously, like horror genre now is seeing like a really huge insurgence, and we're obviously with everyone now developing these games, it's struggling now to find that right window where you're not in direct competition. So
and obviously October is the month that people generally would want to release stuff because Halloween.
Yeah, for sure. You get that buzz. What platforms do you both play on typically?
At the moment, I'm generally PS5, but I'm looking to probably by the end of the year I'll be moving to PC just because of the amount of like indie horror games.
Yeah,
they tend to not release on console unless they get like a bit of a financial backing or find a publisher. So it's I'm kind of like really missing out on those really cool indie games. So that's what I'm going to be aiming for by the end of the year. How about you, Phil?
Same. I've got a PS5 and I've got Game Pass as well, like just in case. Because sometimes you get some gems that come on there for absolute free. So you don't have to fork out for them. It's just like, oh, okay. Try that out. Which is how I discovered the one I mentioned earlier, Bramble.
I'll have to check that out.
But and there's been a few others. Like I don't want to. Obviously, we don't get to pick who gets nominated. So we're not picking favorites. We're just just. But it definitely. I do joke occasionally that the developers just need to stop making games so we can catch up.
I think we're in that COVID area where obviously everyone's made the decisions and started planning and developing these games, and now it's just all coming up to fruition at the moment.
Oh, it's well, especially on Steam. Like it's just the sheer amount of games, you know.
It's amazing how the genre has kept its creativity as well. Because you'd think with everyone coming out with games, well, especially yourself, it's just some really unique stories and ideas coming out, and it's quite a testament, I think, to the horror genre. Like literally, you can make anything horror. It doesn't matter what genre it's from. So it's really cool and interesting to see.
Yeah, exactly. Do you guys are you just covering games, or do you also do other elements of horror as well?
Like I'm quite a big fan of horror TV shows at the moment. They're especially from the makers of Lost. That's a really interesting show. Like that really threw a curveball. Like generally it takes a lot to like scare me. And literally, I think that first episode, it really shook me. So it's kind of, I would recommend, it's only 2 seasons out as well. So it's not like you've got to watch a whole.
I haven't seen it. Is that the one where there's like a town with a little.
So basically, you get a certain sequence happens. I won't reveal too much. But once you've gone through that sequence, you then enter this village. And then as you try and leave, you re-enter it.
Okay.
So you can never leave. So you're stuck in this existential village. But there's when it comes to evening, these creatures, or yeah, I won't tell them too much, but they come out of the woods.
Yeah.
And they've developed over time. It goes back in the stories and how they've developed their systems to survive where they are and how things change. But there's so much mystery. Like, it's one of those where you'll get told one piece of the story and then another 10 are not. So it's kind of, but it's, I hugely recommend that. But I think they might, yeah.
Similar to Lost in the
yeah, in that aspect. It's but yeah, it's I'd highly recommend that one. But then there's a few other like Netflix specials that have appeared that are really good as well. So it's but I'd love the time to like properly invest into doing it, but like, we can't even cover enough horror games.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
But
yeah, there's so much TV out there too. I mean, actually, Lost was a huge inspiration, I'd say, on the Chant as well. So like, I see that. Yeah, definitely big fan. So I'll definitely have to check that out. But I don't think that it's good when it's like 2 seasons, not like I got to catch up on 6.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's too much of that at the moment. I think it's just like you go, you discover a show and it's in its like 12th season or something.
Yeah. Like 10 graphic novels, and you've got webisodes and everything else, and you've got to watch them stuff. But no.
Yeah, I was a big Supernatural fan way back in the day, and then I'm like, I'll get back into that. Oh no, I'm not. There's just way too many to catch up on.
No, you spoke Phil's favorite words there. He loves Supernatural.
Yeah, I was going to say, we just completed the full 15 season rewatch.
Oh,
in this house,
so. That's actually a lot of that is filmed here in Vancouver. So like it would often be the thing where you're just like, you're walking down the street and you see the lights, and then it's like, what's that big muscle car doing back there? And they're like, it's like pretty amazing. It's a very, very Vancouver show.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we'd love to, I think, to cover all things horror, but I think we can at least honor like horror games, and that was one of the reasons we set this all up, is because there wasn't really that space for horror games to be celebrated in the same way. Like, obviously more general game awards, things get muscled out by the gigantic AAA, the next God of War, the next whatever type thing. So it's like there needs to be a space for something, a little spookier and a little more horrifying. So that's what we've can hopefully do with these awards, and with these being able to speak to developers as well, like yourselves, and talk more about it, and hopefully get more people just paying attention to what I think is probably the best genre of games that's 100%. Around.
Yeah. Well, especially like if you look at in the past too, like it's like even so many like console launches, it's like you look at like the Resident Evils, and like I even found like I associate like the way back when, like the boot up sound of the PlayStation to the sounds of Resident Evil. Like it's like those were such a such a big element of gaming, right? And
100%.
And it's great to see things like Silent Hill coming back and so forth, and like, because I think that like there was that time, it feels again where it's like horror was pretty mainstream. Like you didn't necessarily need to be a horror fan to like, especially on the narrative side of things, and it seems like those days are back again, right? Where it's just, now horror is, it's becoming such a sought after place to tell stories, and I do think seeing that like in TV I think has helped as well. So it's pretty exciting. But the indie side of things, it's especially great people like yourselves to get that exposure to a lot of the games, because I think oftentimes like you'll see these kind of indie darling games kind of come out and they'll get like a lot of exposure, but then there's still be quite a few that go unknown. So it's pretty exciting time to be in.
I think it's a testament to like the era that we're in now. Is literally, you don't need to have spent like millions on marketing. It's literally just put out your work and the community finds you. Essentially, there's always community for anyone, and that's the great thing. Is literally you can be a one-man studio doing it yourself for decades, and you can still have a huge fan base.
Yeah. I think the genre itself. I think that's why so many smaller like film productions and stuff also gravitate to horror, because that just the nature of the setting is frequently something that you can do more with less, right? And imagination and you don't show, or like they're often key elements to the genre. So like whereas I think in other genres, like, okay, well, I'm going to do a giant a giant conflict or something, you're kind of screaming for production value. You're screaming for more. Something takes place in the city. You have traffic and and so forth. Where I think just horror it's much more accommodating on that end, and it's great that people are taking advantage of that. And also, it's really neat to see the different styles of like art that people are doing as well, where you get very
100%.
Stylized, looks and influences as well, which is really cool.
Yeah, because it is interesting how obviously when gaming first came about, and obviously with the systems that they had, they were severely limited with what they could do. So that's what they worked with. And now we're in a space where literally you can just click and add assets quite easily.
Yeah.
And people still gravitate to those games that look like they were made 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's
and it's harder to make it look like it made,
exactly.
Made 20 years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it's even interesting to see a lot of the the very stylized games, even have that influence from before, and also just shows how like even looking back at some of the more like traditional horror games, just how well they were designed. Like I think that's the key thing. It's like just that real understanding of pacing and so forth. I think it's so key to the genre. So it's amazing how just even some like classic games that are over 20 years old, they still hold up, in this day and age, right? From a design perspective. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've found, like, been replaying older games recently, even non-horror ones, like the Tomb Raider, for example, and because they're not afraid to kind of just let you get lost and get completely stuck, and you're in an area and there's no music and just lots of weird ambient sound, even that's like far more unnerving, I think, than so I think there's something to be said for a lot of that older style of just kind of stick you in a room somewhere and like leave you to figure it out and just make everything sound really creepy.
Accidental horror.
No, it's I think that kind of just that atmosphere, I think, even if it's like accidental or oftentimes even when we were working on the Chant, there are certain particular things that are unintentional that you're just like, oh, leave it that way, or like that's actually something we found often with the audio. Like sometimes like music tracks wouldn't be triggering or something, or like actually the empty space, it that's super powerful and so forth, right? So and a lot of the time, or it's like, hey, on that graphic setting, the lighting, the lighting's broken or something, like, because it wouldn't be like, this is something we often find. It's like, we're working with Unreal, but it's like, on high versus sometimes low, you'll be, or it's the opposite where it's like, oh, the fog isn't working on low, and it's like this whole like without the fog, this just is like has no atmosphere whatsoever. So a lot of those things can be accidental.
Yeah, I imagine a version of the Chant where you just remove the fog and put, like, I don't know, some kind of upbeat music like alongside it. It'd be a very different experience.
That actually was something that it was really fun to play around with, especially like things with the colored fog and all that. That's something in the DLC we really kind of went overboard on. Like it's because obviously in the Chant you're dealing in kind of the physical world a lot with like, and you're dealing with the narrative with core characters, some of who aren't, they don't even believe what's going on is supernatural, where it's been kind of neat to be able to like just fully embrace that, like, over the top colored lighting and stuff like that, and going a little more overboard on those things. Right? But trying to do that in and balance the system requirements at the same time. Yeah, all that interactive fog is not cheap. So.
Yeah.
But the Chant DLC is actually a free DLC. Is
Yeah.
Right? So,
yeah, it is
and
free.
I believe it's also coinciding with, I don't know whether it's just on Steam or across all platforms, a sale on the main game.
I know something would know the deals, but yeah. So there's going to be a sale, and then the DLC is free to players. So
yeah. So I mean, seems like never been a better time to buy the Chant.
Exactly.
Yeah, we really wanted to make sure that both for new players and I guess kind of pre-existing players, we just wanted to make sure that it was as accessible as possible.
Yeah,
they gotta get a chance to experience it.
Yeah, get horrified by it as well.
Yeah.
Well,
have you seen, like, what have you seen so far? Just in regards to that, I guess, because it was just I guess for us it was just yesterday when we
yeah. So we've just seen the kind of the initial trailer announcing it. Obviously, by the time this is out, we'll have seen more and hopefully have my hands on it playing it. But
yeah,
absolutely, yeah, and it would be great to hear your feedback, on that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for talking to us. It's been like an absolute pleasure just to
it's been
not
great.
just talk about the Chant, but then veer into all things about horror, and it's been fantastic. So, for those watching, there will be links in the description, so where you can check out Brass Token and find out more about their stuff and follow them on social media and so on, and the links at least to Steam for the Chant and the DLC, but it is available across PlayStation and Xbox as well.
Yeah, it'll be on PS5, Xbox Series X, S, and Steam. I'm trying to think on that end. Yeah, and then obviously, like, for if you have any feedback or questions or anything like that, or interactions like to pursue, just drop us a line, and we'll help out in any way we can.
Yeah, no, we'll do.
Cool. Thanks very much. Well, thank you very much again for talking to us. It's been fantastic, and thanks everyone for watching, and we'll hopefully catch you next time.
Thank you so much. Take care.
This has been Talking Terror, the official podcast of the Horror Game Awards. Thank you very much for listening. Check out the links in the description for more info on where to follow our guests in order to support them and keep up to date with their work. The Horror Game Awards will be airing live on YouTube on Saturday 16th of December. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel to avoid missing out on what promises to be a very exciting night of awards and game reveals, as well as future episodes of this podcast and other content. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.